Hi everybody, my name is Tina Nawrocki and I am a 2D animator and concept artist on the video game Cuphead. I joined Studio MDHR in 2015 and I was the 4th animator to join the team. We only had 5 animators in total. I animated the boss fight Sugarland Shimmy with Baroness von Bonbon and all her characters. I also worked on a lot of her run and gun levels and for the King Dice mini boss battles as well. I animated over 60 characters for the game. That was totaling around 9,000 drawings. If you want to know every single character I animated, they're all over here, so you don't have to ask me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the creative process for the run and gun levels. More importantly, Perilous Piers. I really love this level because every single character in it, including the horrible, shitty waves, which took forever to animate, are all my animations, so it's near and dear to my heart. Then I'll talk about my favorite character, which is Baroness von Bonbon. She is definitely my favorite by far because I identify with her. She's super sweet, she's adorable, but she's also a bit of a bitch. And then I'll talk about the very interesting deaths and attacks for Cuphead. So everybody knows it's a little bit hard. I haven't finished the game myself, but the reward that you get, the player gets, is the animation. So what we did to make sure that every single death was really, really satisfying once you finally get to it. Finally, I'll talk about a mystery project that does not involve my work with Studio MDHR, but just to reiterate, there are still passionate people out there who don't want to let this amazing art of classical 2D animation die. So I want to talk about something that was very special about Cuphead, which is that everything was done traditionally by hand. Chad and Jared Moldenhauer, the 2 brothers behind the game, were obsessive in trying to recreate the look of the 1930s, which is very iconic for the game Cuphead. So that included backgrounds done by Caitlin Russell, who's right over here. She's also a Toronto-based artist like I am, and she single-handedly drew and painted every single background for Cuphead, and it's all hand-painted on watercolor. And she was the only background artist on our team, so she's absolutely superhuman. Then there's Ali Morby, who's also a Toronto-based, I would call him more of a craftsperson. He helped us out by doing 3D objects for Cuphead, so that slowly rotating castle in the Grim Matchstick level is actually a 3D object, but a physical 3D object. It's made out of styrofoam and then hand-painted by Caitlin Russell. And then you could see the photo of a giant pyramid for Pyramid Peril with a genie, and that's also just a maquette that's being slowly rotated on their kitchen table. Ali is not a stop-motion animator, so for him this was a learning experience. He also learned bookbinding to make that storybook for Cuphead, which is an actual physical book that you can hold. Normally he's a woodworker and does commissions for furniture and custom things like that, so this was quite the kind of renegade job for him. So the animation was no different. We wanted to make sure that the style was really close to 1930s, which meant a lot of research. The animators watched cartoons from Ub Iwerks, Fleischer Studios, the old Disney cartoons, Merry Melodies, everything that we could, and a lot of watching it frame by frame to make sure that we are really close to the style. It also means animating everything by hand on paper, and we are, some crazy few animators. Oh, poor video. I'm a very fast animator. Generally, I'm one of the fastest that people know, but I don't actually animate that fast. This is a time lapse. And here I'm working on a mini boss. This is the hot dog for Funfair Fever. So, Chad and Jared had to find us a little bit everywhere, the last few people who actually still want to animate on paper. And everything as well was inked on paper. So this is a lovely photo from Gertie the dinosaur. So a lot of ink, a lot of paper, a lot of drawing materials. And the inking was done by Maya Moldenhauer, who is one of our producers at Studio MDHR. She's absolutely superhuman. And so I did around 9,000 drawings, and there are 5 animators in total. So she single-handedly inked every single cell that was ever created for Cuphead, while telling us what to do and that we actually have deadlines, which we didn't have at the beginning. And she also gave birth to 2 children during the production of Cuphead. So the woman is magical. We have production babies at the end of our presentation. So just to show you, this is only my animation, stacks and stacks of paper, all in boxes. Finally, they've got taken to Chad and Jared's basement, where they're living currently. And one thing that you might not know, that we're a very traditional studio in the sense that everything we make is super traditional, on paper, old school. But we're not traditional because we're a studio that doesn't physically sit in the same room together. We're all working remotely online through a server called Basecamp. So I'm the only animator in Toronto. We have one animator in Jake Clark, who's in Vancouver. We have Joseph Coleman in LA, and Hannah Abihana and Dee Johnston, who are in San Francisco. I'm going to talk about the run and gun levels now, which is really fun. So in the 1930s, the cartoons were very thematic. There wasn't really a great story arc, or you didn't really feel for the characters. They would just pick a theme and go for it. So anything that you could think of, like candy, Halloween, plants and animals, Beatles, whatever you want to think about, there was a merry melody or a silly symphony made in that way. So the run and gun levels was a similar approach. It was more like a thematic concept first, and I would get a task from Chad and Jared going, okay, draw us a bunch of characters that live in a tree or near a harbor. And then I would write a list. I really like lists. And I would write any ideas that I had, and I would come up with maybe 10, maybe 20 ideas. And then I would call my sister, who is not an artist. She's a historian who's finishing her PhD at Princeton University. And when I could come up with 10 ideas, she could come up with 50. Like, I don't know what is in the air at Princeton, but she was crazy. She was like my little secret consultant. And after I had a list, I would pick my favorite, and I would start drawing concepts. So this is a bunch of concepts for Perilous Peers. What's really cool about the 1930s is that characters don't only have to be animals or humans. Anything, you can just slap on some eyes, and it's a character, right? So like my beautiful can of worms over here on the top. Another thing that's like as a sidebar, I realized while watching a lot of 1930s cartoons that the female characters are very rare. It's only like a love interest or something, and then it's a female character. So I was drawing a lot of male characters, and I just caught myself doing that because of, you know, watching these cartoons. So I'm like, oh, that's not fucking fair. So I'm going to draw some cool kick-ass female characters so that Chad and Jared can also have, you know, a wider range of characters to pick from, like my beautiful Anchor here, who has her very stylish braid made out of a chain. Here we have some more going forward. Oh, these were great, but they didn't make the cut. They're workout poles. Get it? No? Okay. I liked them. I thought they were cute. And here we have a couple, a mop and a bucket. They've been happily married for 45 years. And so I would keep drawing these concepts and keep drawing until Chad and Jared would yell at me, "Stop it!" Well, no, they wouldn't yell. They're very, very, very chill people. But at some point, they'd be like, "Okay, I think we have enough." And they would look them through and start really focusing on what the gameplay is going to be like and what kind of characters we'll need for the gameplay. And then I would get specific requests, like, "Okay, we want a barnacle that's going to shoot spiky things at Cuphead and Mugman." So I drew a whole bunch of barnacles. The very angry one next to last was the one that got chosen. And then I drew some starfish before, but they're like, we're going to be really small on screen, so we need simpler designs for starfish, and here are a bunch of those. And so the mini bosses was a similar process, but the idea was a lot more clear to begin with. So I got this beautiful sketch from Chad, super talented man, on Basecamp, and it would describe we want a lobster or a crab, and he's going to be swimming in the water. And the other cute little tidbit at the very bottom was that he can have some elements of either a sea captain or a fisherman. So I looked at some old photos of fishermen and captains. So I drew a whole bunch of crabs. I didn't like them very much, so I'm glad they weren't chosen. But you can see I tried to add some kind of hats and pipes and things like that to make them look more seafaring. And then I did a whole bunch of lobsters, trying to make different body types so that Chad had something to pick from that was, you know, wide range. And so Chad liked this one, and then he would come back with a whole bunch of comments, which is very like him. So we want the claws bigger. He liked the other lobsters were kind of standing upright and not kind of floating on the water. He wanted to add hairs and eyelids and a whole bunch of stuff. And then I would go through a series of keys. And this is not for animation. It's just a proof of concept for the character. So the one on the top left was too drunk, seemingly. Although I thought, you know, he's a sea captain. So, but anyway, then the one on the right, the smile was too creepy, but not in a good 1930s creepy way. It was too modern, so we had to mix it. So then the final winner over here was the one at the bottom, which was kind of a mix of both, without the creepy smile and not so drunk. So this is fun and embarrassing. Usually I do reference footage. This one my sister recorded for me. I couldn't find the lobster reference footage, but this is me doing Baroness von Bonbon shooting her candy cane. Does it go back? Hold on. I'm going to have to do it this way, because you have to, you know, bask in the glory of this. So you have to imagine that I'm going pew, pew, pew. You can actually see my lips doing it. So that's me shooting the candy cane. And then after I do a lovely reference footage like that, I do thumbnails, a pass of thumbnails, usually just very simple ones to like break down what the movement's going to be, and this is the one for Captain Lobster. And then I do a second series of thumbnails that look more like the character, which again I couldn't find, I'm sorry. And then I do a post test. So this is done with non-repro blue pencil. This is why it's so dark. I had to scan it really dark to see the lines. And this is just the key frames, so the main drawings that make the movement. So what you see on the thumbnails over here. And that's all I do, and I send it to Chad and Jared. And if they have any feedback, or if they don't like how fast it's going or how slow it's going, changing this doesn't take a long time. So, you know, it's better to show the very, very rough phase and get some feedback right away. After that, I do all the in-betweens. You can see my timing charts are kind of flashing in the corner, but still keeping it very, very rough. If that's approved, I add some secondary action, which means action that is affected by the main body. So you have the beard, the hat, his little antenna. So that's all affected by the main movement, so I add that later. And then I do all the fun little details, so adding teeth and eyes and all the kind of, you know, lines on his torso. And then I tie it down with an HB pencil, and I make it super nice and crisp so that Maya Moldenhauer doesn't shoot herself in the face trying to figure out which line is the final line. And usually this is the final phase, but some characters have a VFX pass, so visual effects. So for Captain Lobster, I suggested there could be some water hanging off of his claws. That was approved, so I roughed it here. You can kind of see it in the light blue. And then finally, on a second piece of paper, I did the water effect. And this is the final animation that I then hand over to Maya, and then gets colored by Tyler. And then this is Captain Lobster in all his glory. I'm sure there's some PTSD in the room, I hope. I never got here, so I don't. I still love him. Anyway, so that's Captain Lobster. And now we're going to talk about my favorite character. Yay, Baroness von Bonbon. So she was my first assignment when I joined Studio MDHR. And it's kind of messed up because I have a huge sweet tooth. I love eating pastry. I love baking. I hate cooking, but I love everything that's sweet. And they gave me this woman, and I was like, yes! So that was really great. Also, I try to really imbue some of my personality, so don't fuck with me, basically. This is the base camp. So it was very detailed. They really knew what they wanted. They wanted a candy princess. They knew she was going to sit on top of a castle or in a tower of sorts, and she would have lots of candy minions doing her bidding. There was this beautiful storyboard, also drawn by Chad, which you could kind of see that they had an idea. There was a drawbridge at first on the castle, and you have the waffle, and I think the gobstopper were really well thought out from the begin with. And I love this drawing at the bottom. This is the castle turning into a monster, and I love a little comment, that's a great drawing, because it is. It's wonderful. Another fun fact about the obsessiveness of Studio MDHR, not only is everything done as if it's made in the 1930s to make a 1930s cartoon, but everything had to be era-specific. So the candy in Baroness von Bonbon levels had to be invented, you know, and around in the 1930s. So now I have a huge amount of useless trivia knowledge. For example, the jelly bean was invented in 1861. If you are curious. And if you have a bar night where specifically the theme is 1930s candy, invite me. I'll be on your team. I'll do great. So lots of Wikipedia. And then the next thing that I thought of when I thought of a candy princess, and this is very kind of pop culture-y, is the French princess Marie Antoinette, because she famously, and I think this is historically misappropriated, this is what happens when your sister is a historian, constantly correcting you. Supposedly, she said to the report that the peasants have no bread to eat, she said, let them eat cake, because she was so spoiled. And famously, she dies, of course, by beheading with the guillotine. So this is why Baroness von Bonbon can like sever her own head and chuck it at people. Then again, thinking as if I was an artist in the 1930s, I would probably be inspired by the actresses of the time, you know, the contemporary beauties. So I looked at a bunch of actresses, and these are my favorites. We have Betty Grable, whose haircut I really liked and kind of inspired baronesses. We have Loretta Young and Bebe Daniels, who have those thin eyebrows, you know, that like kind of doll look and the heart-shaped mouth. And then finally, Letty Linton. And the last dress on the right-hand side was inspiration for Baroness's cake dress. But also she kind of looks like a femme fatale that you don't mess with, and I kind of like that about her. And then, of course, watching a whole bunch of cartoons. And these are cartoons that Chad and Jared recommended. They're huge nerds of the 1930s cartoons, so they know a bunch of these ones. So you had Cookie Carnival, which is a Disney Silly Symphony, which is inspiration for Baroness herself. And then you have Candyland by Burn Studios, Bon Bon Parade, Columbia Pictures, Somewhere in Dreamland by Fleischer Studios, which are all inspiration for the mini bosses. We had a lot of cool candy characters. So this is the first pass of concepts for Baroness. She looks a little bit older here for some reason, and at first I had her holding a lollipop scepter that she could like admire herself as if it's a mirror. But you could see the hat, the kind of ice cream hat, was one of her early concepts. Then Chad asked me, hey, what if Baroness was a little bit more curvy? So we did this version. Although he liked it, he didn't like how she was starting to look too modern and not 1930s enough. So we abandoned it, and also he said you can never trust a skinny chef, so it's better to have her skinny. And then there was this really creepy pass of trying to make Baroness completely out of candy, which was kind of weird, and we kind of abandoned it very quickly. However, though, the dress in the middle is almost Baroness's final dress. So this was really interesting in that we did get her costume down right here. So while I was working on Baroness, in tandem I was working on the castle, and that one went a lot faster than the princess. I had some thumbnails like this, and then I really quickly went to the final drawing. Also, I chucked in the first drawing that I can remember where Baroness starts looking like herself, and as a joke I made her shooting a candy cane, so that kind of stuck. And this is the castle, the final sketch. I went really quickly to this one, and you can see Baroness on top. She's not yet really well thought out, so the castle was first. And I did this lovely idle cycle for the castle. Famously, Maya Moldenhauer times herself when she inks drawings, and the castle, the chase scene, is one of the ones that she spent the most time on. I think it took her 20 minutes per drawing to ink it. And speaking of a chase scene, here we have a sequence of thumbnails that I wanted to do for the final chase scene with the castle. And you know, I had her grab him by the ears and tell him to sick him, and then they start going on. And Chad was like, no, this is going to take way too long. The players are going to get bored. I'm like, you're wrong. This is going to be awesome. And I won. And so here is Baroness grabbing the castle by the ears. As you can tell, this animation was so complicated that I split it to several pieces of paper. So the castle's one level, Baroness is another level, and then his arms are yet another level of paper. And then this is a lovely chase scene where she's chucking her head. And this, again, the teeth had to be another level because they retract when the peppermint comes out. I'm sure nobody has noticed this because you're going insane trying to escape. And then this is it in all its glory. Again, apologies. Apologies for PTSD. I've never got past this level. Isn't that weird? Like, the level that I can't beat is my own level. It's very, I think it was meant to be, but I'm going to be stuck here forever. I got to this part, but then that's it. I've never actually beaten her. So I feel for all of you who haven't either. Deaths and attacks, and there's going to be some spoilers. You've had over a year. I don't care anymore. So we're going to talk about really cool deaths and attacks. And again, it's a reward for the player, right? So we wanted them to be extremely original. We never wanted to repeat a death twice. For really tiny enemies, we would have them just disappear in a puff of smoke, which was cute. But for anything slightly bigger, they needed to look cool when they die. So again, I would do a list of wacky deaths and attacks, and again, I would call my sister, and her brain works in strange and mysterious ways, or I don't know what's in the air in Princeton, but she would come up with crazy ideas, and I loved her for it. Some of which actually made it into the game, and like my sister deserves the credit, because it was her ideas who made it. So this is thumbnails that I did for attacks for the Fat Demon in the last devil fight. So you have like wacky things, like his head turns into an elephant and he shoots peanuts, his hump turns into a volcano and shoots fireballs, he grows a third belly, his nose turns into a tuba, etc., etc. And here, this is for the Baroness fight, the very end. Even there, we did some exploration. We really did think that chucking her head would be the funniest, but you know, whatever ideas are there. So we had her take off her hat and shoot ice cream. My personal favorite was that she, you know, for some reason breathes fire and throws burning marshmallows at you. So that was pretty good. And then we have Pip and Dot, which is the domino duo that you fight in the King Dice fight. And they're one of my favorites because for some reason we had so many ideas of what they could be doing. So here are a bunch of attacks, like they lay an egg and they shoot it at you. One of my favorites too is he uses his teeth as a discus and throws it at you and then like grabs them back. It grows a third mouth from a belly. They turn into a skeleton. And then there's more. There's like bubble gum and a flamingo grows out. I don't know. It was just a lot of cool ideas. And then, let's see. Yes, so this is all the attacks, my favorite attacks. Here's Hocus Pocus. Here's Pippin Dot growing a third mouth. And then, of course, a little mini domino out of her hat. And this one, I think it's wacky that nobody noticed that his mouth actually comes from his chest. And then this one, I just like the animation, so I included it in there. And then you have the fat demon blowing skull bubbles in the end. So for deaths, it was very similar. We wanted them to be fun and original, so here's a bunch for Hocus Pocus. He gets choked out by his own bow tie. He electrocutes himself. His hat becomes a monster. Here, oh, this is a sidebar. I love each and every one of my 60+ characters that I made for Cuphead. I want to cuddle them. They're like my babies. It's beautiful, except for this fucker. I hate this monkey with a fiery passion. It is the worst assignment I had on Cuphead. He is such a dick. And like, so killing him was the most amazing assignment I've had. And I was so happy to just destroy this little... So I had, fun ideas like him chopping himself up, falling to his death, falling to pieces, slapping his own face with his cymbals. It was great. And then there's Pippin Dot deaths, which were really fun as well. Her blowing her lid because she's so angry and he goes flying. They pass a handkerchief up and down. They faint. They fall. They cry. All that kind of stuff. And then other characters, it was less about an original death, but more about what would the character like be with his personality or her personality. So for the Tipsy Troupe, which is the alcohol trio, it was more about like alcohol drunk kind of gags. So there was like, needing to pee is one of them, like crying because we got depressed, catching fire because alcohol is very flammable, and so on. And then for Piruletta, which is the ballerina from King Dice, I just thought she was super dramatic. She's a ballerina, so her death needs to be like, oh, so dramatic. So there was some thumbnails for that. And then the smaller characters, even though we didn't have time for a very nice, super detailed death, at least we would explore poses for a funny pose in which they fall off screen. So here you have a bunch for the fat devil, and then you have a bunch, they look like they're rocking out at some kind of a discotheque, but they're actually dying. It's the skinny devils. And then we have, there we go, Hocus Pocus dying, being choked out. I love this one. Oh, yes. Die, monkey, die. And this is one of my favorites. She like kicks him in the eyeballs. This is my sister's idea. It made the cut. And then, of course, the poor Tipsy Troupe are so sad. Oh my God, they're so sad. So sad. And then drama, all the drama. So dramatic. And then little fat demon falling off screen. There we go. So now about the most famous death that I got to work on, which is the Devil death. So the Devil was animated by an extremely talented animator, Hana Abihana, who won an Annie Award for his animation for Cuphead. And he did all the beautiful, amazing Devil animations. And he couldn't do the Devil death for the very simple reason that he was getting married. And he had planned his wedding a year in advance, and they were laughing like, ha ha ha, you'll still be animating right before your wedding, because we were planning to finish, of course, Cuphead really much earlier. And of course, he was animating the day before his wedding. So I got this email going, you heard this right, you have to animate the death, you have 4 days, go. So that was terrifying. So this is a key by Hana Abihana for the final devil fight close-up that I got as a reference. He also made already some thumbnails of what he thinks the devil could look like when he dies for my enjoyment. And then I did this beautiful thing. I used to have purple hair at the time, purple-gray. And I would do these beautiful reference videos. And this is, again, like I love sharing all the embarrassment. It gets better. Oh, there we go. And it gets much better at the very, very end. We're going to get there. Yeah, there we go. So this is my reference footage. And then I had like picked my absolute favorite expressions. And after I did that, I did some thumbnails, which you have again. Now you kind of know what my process is. I send this to Chad. We picked some. I did some keys, which you have over here. And then Chad had some comments on how to keep it more like Hannah's key to make sure the style was on the same, so the mouth had to be a bit rounder and the eyes a little bit more circular. And then I did this pose test, so just 3 frames. It's the 2 keys and a breakdown. Usually I animate really rough, but here, it's just a face, so you do have to animate some details. And then I threw in some in-betweens, more in-betweens, and then this is almost done with all the details, and here it's tied down. And I chucked that over to Maya, who inked it, and then Dee Johnson, who is another animator on the team, she did the beautiful kind of highlights and animated all that in the color process. So there he is. That's the final def. And I'm going to talk about a mystery project if we have time. Yes, I'm doing so good. I'm like powering through this, because usually it takes me an hour, and I really wanted to talk about this. So this is a new project that I'm working on. After Cuphead launched, we were almost in shock about the reception, how everybody loved it. And then I got a ton of emails kind of asking me to work on 2D projects, on animation shorts. A lot of times it's like a little student from like some college, would you do my animation for me? I'm like, no. So I would ignore most of them and say thank you, but I have enough work on my plate, which I did. And at first I refused this email, which is a Hotmail account. So I thought like, oh, this is not important. And I didn't even look at who signed it. And his name is Brian Kessinger. And then he was really persistent. I was like, I don't have time this month. He's like, oh, next month works fine. And then he sent me this promotional poster for what he wanted to do. And I'm like, fuck, that's good. So I was like, oh my God, who is this Brian Kessinger? And if you don't know who he is, like me, I Googled him. So Brian Kessinger is actually the youngest animator that ever got hired at Disney. He worked for 16 years at Disney as an animator and storyboard artist. He's currently, I think, switched to Lucasfilms, and he does his own stuff on the side as well. So a lot of projects aside from the Disney work. He has a very popular following for Otto and Victoria, which is the octopus here, and the Victorian lady with a kind of turquoise hair. He does a lot of children's books, and he does Little Kylo Ren. Maybe you've seen the comic. It's very popular. So it's kind of what Kylo Ren was like as a kid, a total little asshole, but in the style of Calvin and Hobbes. So it's really, really cute. So Brian Kessinger approached me with this new project and a new character. He calls him Jasper J. Pumpkinhead. And what he wanted to do as one of his dreams was not to animate a short himself, but to be director, to work with a small team and create a classical 2D animated short. So he worked with Cory Loftus, who is another Disney artist, to work on the character sheet for Jasper J. Pumpkinhead. So this is a collaboration of Brian himself and of Cory. And then he also hired a 3D artist called Nathan Mansfield to make a 3D sculpt of Jasper to then 3D print so that we have a maquette to see what he looks like from all angles. And it was hand-painted by Brian himself. The idea with this kind of project is to get it started with a small team and then one day to crowdfund it. So that's one of those magical things about the age we live in, that projects like this, which normally wouldn't get funding, can be crowdfunded by people all over the world who are passionate about 2D animation. So I'm kind of crossing my fingers that maybe this would be a Kickstarter reward, like if somebody would want to get one of these maquettes. I hope so, fingers crossed. So there's a lot of new challenges working on a side project like this because the 1930s, the characters have very limited emotions, right? Like they weren't meant to be really feeling creatures, and like in the 1940s and 50s, that's when Disney really tried to refine animation, and then you had more complex emotions with your characters. So this is, again, more in the style of the 1940s. Also, the character has an extremely simple face, so trying to get emotion out of just two circles and a half moon is pretty interesting. But working with a storyboard artist of the caliber of Brian Kessinger is just a pure joy. So this is Brian's boards of Jasper trying to learn how to fly and then falling on his face in the mud. So as always, I did reference footage, I did thumbnails, and then I did a really quick pose test for Jasper falling. And one of the other reasons why we're doing it on paper is that Brian wants to reward the backers with like original drawings. So if you want one of my drawings, please back the project once it's on Kickstarter. Then, of course, I did the in-betweens, as we know from the Cuphead work. And then finally, here it is, all nice and tied down. Generally speaking, I'm very self-critical, so when there's this rare moment where I have one drawing that I actually like, this is the one drawing from that sequence that I really like, and nobody will ever see it, but I'm like, yes, it's a good one. So those little things that keep you going. Then there's another scene which was also shared recently by Brian, so I'm allowed to show you guys. It's a scene where it's a more body mechanics type scene, which is really nice and exciting, is where Jasper picks himself up after falling down and puts his stick back into the ground and is very sad about what just happened. So here are some of my lovely thumbnails of trying to explore what happens. And this is also nice, embarrassing reference footage, which I love sharing with a broom in my living room.
Recording.
And my poor boyfriend who has to record all these things. So I have, I think, 15 of these before. I'm so sad. And so just, you know, to show you the final result, there's poor Jasper. So it's actually pretty close. Like, you know, poor little guy, right? But it's really exciting to try something a little bit different and try and get some more emotion out of my animations. So here are some really fun Inktober drawings from Brian Kessinger. He decided to draw Jasper last Inktober so that people get to know the character. And I think he's really lovable and wonderful, and it's really great to see Brian, you know, get him out there to the audience before we finish this short. And so if you want to know more about Brian Kessinger and about this project, please follow him on all the things. So there's a Twitter, Brian Kessinger, Instagram, Kickstarter is Help a Pumpkin Fly. And he has an Etsy shop as well where you can buy prints of Jasper and, you know, just follow all the art of Brian. So please follow that. And then, do we have time? Yes, we do. Okay, so for people who are excited about 2D animation, maybe some artists or some programmers that want to give it a try, I have a whole bunch of books. I'm old school. I have less websites and more books to recommend. So obviously, the Bible of all Bibles, The Animator Survival Kit, and by Richard Williams, and of course, The Illusion of Life by Frank and Ollie. So Frank Thomas, Ollie Johnston, two of the 9 old men from Disney. So those 2 books, you just like cuddle at night, you put under your pillow, and you just never let them go. Then there's some really great effects animation that we had to do for Cuphead, which was super exciting. And if I had all the time, I would do like a 10-minute presentation just on the effects. So Elemental Magic by Joseph Gilland, who is, again, a Disney artist from the time of classical frame-by-frame effects. Amazing for even 3D animators, because it really just explains how you think about effects and energy and how it all kind of works. So I really recommend those 2 books. Amazing. If you are into just getting better at animation and character animation, or you're an artist, a concept artist, I sincerely recommend Movement and Form by Samantha Youssef. Samantha Youssef is an ex-Disney animator who worked in the last kind of phases of the 2D department, and she has made this amazing book about the line of action, about the line of energy that goes through your body when you're animating, and nobody has explained it as good as she has. It's such a great book. It's one of those aha moments when you read it, so please, please look it up. It's really, really good. If you're into 1930s style, The Hidden Art of a Disney Golden Age, that's a great book because it's kind of like my presentation. All the like behind the scenes sketches and like cool quirky things that you don't see are in this book. And then finally, if you are just curious about what happened in that era of animation in the United States, there's 2 biographies. The Hand Behind the Mouse, which is about Ub Iwerks, who was the actual designer of Mickey Mouse and was Disney's right-hand man for a long time. And Out of the Inkwell by Richard Fleischer, Max Fleischer's son, who wrote a biography about his father. And it's really heartbreaking, but also a really, really great book. So please check those out. Really good stuff. Finally, shameless self-promotion. Please follow me on all the things. I am on Twitter. I am on Instagrams. I have a blog where I sometimes post some stuff. And I have an Etsy shop as well. And then for all new Cuphead news, which of course I cannot talk to you about right now because I'm not allowed, please follow Studio MDHR. They will post whenever they can. They have a website and they also have a Twitter at studiomdhr.com. And then before I leave, every time I go to a festival or to a conference, I make characters based on the country where I'm going to. So these are all the Polish characters. As you can tell, there's quite a bit of alcohol. There's some vodka, there's some miód pitny, and you know, a pickle, and orzeł biały w koronie. So I have them with me. I'll be selling them for 20 zlote. So if you want a little print, and they're all hand signed, so it wasn't printed signatures. I like slaved over this and hand signed every single one of them. So come see me, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
some time for questions. Yeah, good.
It was amazingly cute presentation. I think you have to admit. You have to admit, really. Well, it was extremely fast, and we managed to have time for some questions.
Yay! Usually it takes me an hour, so I was pumping it to try and get this out there. So good job.
So if you have any questions, please come forward here, because we would like that everybody will hear it.
Speaking as someone who survived Cuphead, and I love the game and you're working it, I have to ask, how does it feel to contribute to pain and suffering of so many people?
Oh, it's wonderful. It's one of the greatest achievements of my life, really.
That's exactly the answer I expected. Thank you.
Hi. I have to use this opportunity to thank you for the mind-blowing adventure that was Cuphead. It was one of the best gaming adventures I've ever had. And the question is, actually two questions. The more positive one is, what is the craziest brainstorm idea you've had, but it got rejected to your pity? And what was, because you don't use this technique in games too much, so which errors did you make? What was the mistakes and the lessons learned the harsh way?
So it's hard to pick the craziest idea that I wish didn't get into Cuphead, because every character I had crazy ideas, which was like, oh, I wish that one had gone in. So I can't think of one. But I was really happy. My favorite death for Pip and Dot was the eyes in the kicking in the eyeballs, and I was like, yes, it made it. So that was great. When it comes to lessons learned, we definitely did learn a lot, because this is the first time anybody tried to attempt to do this. And just by talking with the animators after the fact, and as we start work on DLC, we made some tweaks to make the process better, especially for the inkers. So for example, I don't know if anybody knows this in 2D animation, we don't only do timing charts to make sure we know what our ease in, ease outs are, but we also use X sheets. So it's like an Excel sheet, and you write down the frames and like what your action is as you're going. And I would do that for myself because that's how I was taught. Abby Hanna would do that because he worked at Disney. But we did it for ourselves, and it turns out the programmers sort of loved to have those, because then they could know like what all the frame numbers were, when there was a loop, when there was a repeat. You know what they did instead? They would like frame by frame our fucking QuickTime videos and write it themselves. I was like, oh my God, we didn't know that they were doing that. So that was a aha moment that we should just give them X sheets. So we kind of streamlined that process. And another thing for Maya Moldenhauer, she would take our animations and put them in a sequence. And we usually write our numbers in the top right corner because it's out of the way of an animation, it's easy to track it. Whereas it turns out she would have to go back again, frame by frame, and like remember what number was what. Whereas if we just wrote the numbers closer to the animation, she would have them right away, and it would make her life so much easier. So stuff like that, we didn't know. We're like, you were like suffering for 4 years, and it's so easy for us to fix this. So, you know, live and learn, so to speak.
Thank you. And please pass my props to the whole team, because it was a mind-blowing adventure despite learning a lot of new swear words.
Speaking of the whole team, we have Christopher Madigan here in Poland. Yay! He did the amazing soundtrack for Cuphead, the incredible jazz, and his talk is tomorrow at 11, I think in the same room, I'm not quite sure. But please go see it as well, because it's super exciting. The music is amazing, also quite the achievement, so check it out.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Any other questions? Yeah, another one. And yeah, I'm confirming that tomorrow we'll be meeting Christopher here at 11.
Before you go, I want to take a picture of all you guys, if you don't mind.
I want to ask you about basics. If I want to start animation, it is easier to start with this bouncy, cartoony style, or maybe start with something more static, realistic, like...
Definitely bouncy, cartoony. And the reason is that the principles stay the same, but when you exaggerate them really a lot, you learn quicker. So one of the classic first 2D animation exercises is the bouncing ball, right? It goes down, it squishes, and goes back up. So you have stretch and squash, which you're learning, and you're also learning about arcs. So the more cartoony the movement, the more obvious the principles of animations are. And then you apply those same principles, but you tone it down, tone it down, tone it down, tone it down. And And so all the animations for Jasper, for example, which are slightly more realistic and subtle, all those principles apply, but it's a lot more subtle, so it's harder to learn that way. So I would definitely go the cartoony route first and then become more realistic as you go. Whereas if you're learning to draw, it's the opposite. Learn realism first and then learn to cartoon, right? So it's kind of counterintuitive that way.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
We still have some time for 1-2 questions, maybe. Please come to the stage. Anybody else? So just in case, you can come here.
Hey, thanks for the great talk. I had a question about other types of cartoons, like, for example, 80s Japanese cartoons,
Yeah.
like Tsubasa or we had it in Poland at that time, and this is completely different school. But do you think if with Cuphead you open game development for different styles, for adapting cartoons into games for different styles, like, for example, Japanese 80s cartoons?
I think that definitely the studio in general is in love with 2D animation as a whole. And I know, like, in the development before Cuphead, there was talk of, all different styles. So I think there is a general love for 2D animation. So we don't know what the future holds when it comes to, future projects. But definitely the one thing that Chad and Jared have promised us is that everything made by Studio MDHR will be hand-drawn, hand-animated traditionally to keep that kind of, the love for 2D animation alive. So that's a promise for sure.
Great, thank you very much once again.
Last question, if there is one. Wow.
So what's the story behind the monkey? Why do you hate him?
Why do I hate the monkey? So I think the problem is that if a monkey was animated in 3D, it'd probably be the easiest assignment on the face of a planet. He's a very kind of organic, mechanical shape. So he has like the curved arms, but they're actually flat because they're made of wood. He has like this stupid face, which is not a sphere, but not a square. It's kind of a square sphere. And he has to rotate freakishly slowly, a freakishly little amount like this. And like for anybody who hates perspective like I do, like that was such a bitch. And it like, we were also paid per drawing, and I calculated, I think the amount of hours I spent on that stupid animation, I was like getting paid like $2 an hour or something at this point, because I was, and then Hannah had to jump in, and it was just so embarrassing because I was struggling so much. Hannah's amazing at perspective, and he drew like little grids for me and like helped me out. But like, again, if it was 3D, like you just put like a thing and there you have it. Like there's no squash and stretch, there's no nothing. It's just super mechanical. So I hated it, and then it just wouldn't die. It's like, okay, so he's rotating like this. Okay, fine, it's over. Okay, but now he's rotating closed. Oh, now he needs to go from the closed to the open while rotating. Oh, now he has to go the other way. Oh, now he has to have a transition from this to attack. Oh, now he has to transition from that to attack. And then just like, it just wouldn't die. Like it just kept, and I just hated him so much. And then the death animation, on top of being a death animation, it was also the most squashy, kind of more cartoony animation I got to do, and it felt so good. But I hate him, I do, yes.
Great talk, thanks.
Thanks. We have another last question.
Okay.
Please
Yes?
stand in the front.
My funny last question. Will you marry me?
I have a man in my life, so...
Okay.
Sorry.
We meet yesterday, and I had a kid.
Yes.
And he is 6 years old, and this Cuphead is his favorite game.
Which is wonderful.
Yes,
Yay.
don't forget for the sign what we talk.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
thank you very much.
Okay. Cheers, guys. Don't move. Don't move. Don't go anywhere. Don't even applaud yet.
Smile, smile, please.
Yeah, just smile. Hold on. There we go. Yay! And then Cuphead, everybody. 1, 2, 3, Cuphead. Okay. I'm done.
Tina Nawrocki.